of volunteers, some of which are really small, most of which are adults that can drive. And to give you an idea of how many volunteer hours we generate with this Gila Monster project, it's upwards of almost 550 hours per year. And these volunteers in their own vehicles, almost always four-wheel drive vehicles, are driving nearly 8,000 miles annually to help us track Gila monsters on the landscape. If you do the numbers, that's essentially almost $22,000 a year that these guys are generating for us in terms of in-kind match. At a 3-to-1, that's almost $65,000. So it's almost $200,000 that these guys have been helping generate to match federal grants and whatnot. So again, I couldn't do this without the support of some of these volunteers. So to go through the process, once we see a Gila monster on the landscape in a study area, we grab it, we put it in a bucket, we bring it to our office where we anesthetize them with the help of Perry. And we intubate them right there, we get them all knocked out, and then we implant a transmitter that's a little smaller than 2 inches, and this one actually has a little thermal device that monitors temperature, body temperature, at every hour interval. And once they have been implanted, they have only a day to recover, which they recover really fast, and then the best place for them to actually recover, as you all probably know if you've been to the hospital, is home. So we send them back home where we start radio tracking them. To give you an idea, this is kind of some of the home ranges of about 12 individuals in one study area. Again, 16 in the McCulloughs, 6 at Red Rock. You'll notice probably right away, it's probably a little hard to see in this slide, but every monster is uniquely banded. So just like your fingerprint, we can ID each monster based on their banding patterns. Even with a head photo or a tail photo, we've been able to ID individuals, which is pretty neat. On average, in the McCulloughs, we've tracked each individual 30 times, whereas at Red Rock 13 times, and again, that's probably an artifact of 3 of our monsters being killed or potentially poached. And maximum, we've tracked one individual monster nearly 80 times. So we have a pretty good estimate of where it goes. Hopefully, I don't know if I can get this thing to work. There's a video embedded. Maybe I'll walk over and see if I can get this guy to go. So these guys can move a mile within a week. In fact, it seems like within 48 hours, these guys can walk a mile. I think you'll be surprised when you see the size of a Gila monster that they can just charge across a mile of landscape that quickly. And this is a video that one of my volunteers took when she was tracking. And just to give you a glimpse of the Gila monster and also the relative size to your foot, here's the Gila monster lumbering across the landscape. She stood still the whole time, obviously. And you'll notice this Gila monster could care less that she was there. So a pretty big lizard, right? So what we're finding is on average their home range goes from about 1/4 of a mile to 1 mile square. Males obviously have larger home ranges. Females have a little tighter sight fidelity and home range. And so of those monsters, given their movement, you'd expect we'd see them all the time, right? But again, because they spend so much time in shelters, they're actually only detectable less than 33% of the time. Now, when I say detectable, we're out there, and a lot of these volunteers have done this for so long now, that we're able to see that Gila monster tail in a hole, and that's what we call detectable. So it's really skewed. I think if you were to say, when are monsters out on the landscape and like visible to anybody, it's maybe 10% max of the time. So it's a pretty tough critter to find. The nice thing is when you get one monster, they lead you to others. So that's how we've been able to beef up our numbers. And so this concept of living in shelters is really intriguing. And this graph right here, I'll walk you through it. Essentially, this is the number of shelters here on the y-axis. And on the x-axis, you have months. And so you'll notice that in the wintertime, Gila monsters individually use shelters. So they don't hang out with other monsters. They pretty much find their own shelter and they hunker down. Now, as you move into April through June, you'll see a huge spike in social shelters and the fact that they're reusing social shelters. The reason being, obviously, is because that's breeding season. So they're looking for mates. And that also means that multiple males are looking for one female, which means they're wrestling. So you see combat and things like that. What's nice is that these social shelters, they're seldom used in the winter. You don't see a lot of monsters packing together socially in the winter months. You see them through April and June. Again, that just indicates that it's breeding. This kind of led us to think, man, I wonder if we could just put trail cameras in front of these shelters and actually get at use and understand better when they're leaving, when they're entering, actually how much activity they're spending on the landscape. And so that's just what we did. We've planted, like I said, over 20 trail cameras across multiple home ranges. That way we ensure we're not just getting the same monster on every single camera, but rather we're capturing different monsters. And lo and behold, one trail camera caught 4 different monsters in the course of less than 1 month, which, as I noted, we could identify based on their patterns. And you'll notice right here, there's a couple monsters hanging out in that shelter. So that was really cool. So obviously we hit a honey hole there. The other thing we used trail camera for was we saw a full-on track mark into a shelter. And we figured, well, why not just put a trail camera up? Maybe we can catch this monster. Maybe it's one of our lost monsters and battery died or something. And it was a brand new monster. So one of my volunteers the next day went out, sat there, waited till sunset. We knew the time that monster was going in and leaving that shelter. He went there an hour before, sat down, and lo and behold, monster comes walking up to go in the shelter, catches it. Now that's one of our transmitted animals. So the utility of trail cameras is amazing. We're hoping to kind of move into that because it's a way more passive way of monitoring these as opposed to knocking them out and putting a transmitter inside of them. Plus it requires a lot less effort on the ground. And so now to talk about threats. Obviously one of the biggest threats to Gila monsters is urban sprawl. And this is a former study site of a guy by the name of Dan Beck, who's kind of the father of Gila monster ecology. This is Paradise Canyon in St. George. That was a really well-known Gila monster area that now unfortunately is got a lot of houses in it. This is a video. I don't know if you guys want to see it, but I'll show it to you anyways. Just to show kind of the sprawl in Las Vegas that we've experienced in the last 40 years. Note that it starts in 1972. Now we're up to 75, 80. And you'll see that over here is actually one of our study sites. So we know Gila monsters occur across all these escarpments. And more we're finding people get Gila monsters in their backyard. And that's obviously an artifact of their backyards now becoming one with Gila monster habitat. And that's 2010. So kind of a sobering fact, but it's obviously a threat. It's hard to do something about that necessarily. The other threat that we definitely know of, as I noted before, these guys seem to be very humid-loving species, which is interesting that they do so well seemingly in the Mojave. One thing that came out of a recent National Geographic article on Gila monsters is that they can spend only about 81 days with the full bladder without getting another drink of water. As we get more droughts and whatnot, obviously that gap may increase. And so that's something that obviously has a lot of people concerned about. And given that Gila monsters can live for over 20 years, and they take 4 to 5 years to reach sexual maturity, a few bad years could potentially decrease the populations. And so that's something that obviously is of concern, especially since we're seeing more drought and a lot less water. But I guess time will tell. And that's kind of the importance of some of this population monitoring. The other thing is, and I commend NDOW, as all states that have Gila monsters in them, we have regulations prohibiting collection of these guys. Unfortunately, Gila monsters can get upwards of $2,000+ per individual. So poaching is a reality in every state in which they occur. It was suggested to me a couple years ago and has been routinely, every time I bump into, you'd be surprised, I bump into like former hobby collectors and commercial collectors of different reptile species, and many of them have admitted to collecting Gila monsters in the past. or have suggested they have friends, it's like my buddy collected Gila monsters, and they've even told me how they've done it, and it was really intriguing. But they suggested to me that Nevada actually may be kind of a sink or a source for a lot of illegal collection. And I asked why, and they said, well, regulations kind of differ between states. And so I want to make sure you know I'm not advocating anything necessarily, I'm just educating. But one point that was made is that we do have different hobby regulations across the Southwest. If you notice, 3 states, Idaho, California, and Arizona, require hunting licenses. No species of conservation priority can be collected in those states. Oregon and Utah, no license is required to collect even common reptiles, but no species of conservation priority can be collected. In Nevada, we allow people to collect species of conservation priority, which I've found a lot of people from California and Arizona call me frequently to ask what they need to do to collect certain species, and they're really excited that they don't need to get a hunting permit. So I think people do flock. The other thing is that we do have commercial collection regulations in place, but compared to other states, we allow commercial collection, whereas many other states don't. So that potentially might set the perfect storm. And also, I do want to note, because the banded Gila monster is so beautiful, people covet that more than the reticulated Gila monster. And so I think it's just the perfect storm, and it's hard to discern whether it's regulations or whether it's just the fact that they're very coveted. But it has been suggested by a number of people that may be why Gilas are disproportionately collected in our state. That's the thing, though, it's hard to prove that, because a lot of these are actually sent off to like a European market, because $2,000 in the States is nothing compared to sending them to Germany, where you can generate maybe $5,000 for a Gila monster. And with that, maybe I'm done? Maybe not. I was going to say the next slide is just if you have any questions. Also, it gives my contact info. And if any of you would like to come out and track Gila monsters, I'll be honest, it's rugged terrain, and you'll be like, I never want to do that again. But it's a really cool experience. Again, you're not guaranteed a Gila monster. We might see a tail at best. But we do a lot of other projects with regard to snakes and lizards. So feel free to contact me if you want to get out and see some cool reptiles. Yeah.
Yes, is there any evidence that they may utilize some of the small game guzzlers for water?
Yeah,
And
actually.
is it possible?
There is, yeah. I know that from our southern region, when they've put up trail cameras on some of those guzzlers, occasionally they get a photo of a Gila monster. So they definitely will. And I'm sure, it's hard to say that might, prolong the need for water, but they definitely are known to use a guzzler here and there. Yep.
If the commission has any other questions, let's come on back up to the front and we'll.
You guys want to see some Gila monsters? Sure. Absolutely. I may need to ask my chief for
Director Wasley.
Yeah, before we take the kids out, I just want to thank the commission again for the continued opportunity to get some of these less well-known programs and projects before you. And I really want to thank staff for their efforts on these projects and bringing this in, because historically in 20 years with the department, we haven't taken advantage of the opportunity of having people in the room or attending remotely to let them know who we are as an agency and a lot of the great work that our folks do. So again, I'd like to thank both the commission and staff. So I really appreciate it.
And I want to thank the department as well. This is one of my favorite things when we come to these meetings is.
This in the department activity report, right?
Yeah, that's of course. That's why we did it all at once, right?
Only when Liz reads it.
So I think at this point we'll take a break for lunch until 2:15, and then we can also interact with the Gila monster.
The monsters.